Honorable Member for Vieux Fort.
Mr. Speaker, I hope that my comments on this piece of legislation would not be misconstrued, misunderstood, and would perhaps urge the caution that is intended. Mr. Speaker, there was a time in this House when an order paper was prepared and bills had to go through its 3 stages, that the leader of the government business would consult with the leader of the opposition and say, listen, today I'm going to go through the 3 readings of this bill because of some urgency. There's a reason and I require your cooperation. And I recall several instances when I served as a leader of government business, I consulted the then leader of the opposition and said, I require your assistance and cooperation on this matter. I'm sorry that both of them are not here today, meaning the member for Castries North and the member from Euclid North. So today we have a slew of bills to go through in one session, some very, 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 very serious pieces of legislation. And in fairness, sometimes there's no question that you need parliamentary time to do the research and to review legislation and to give credible responses to what you have. The legislation we are debating today, I think, was circulated to honorable members sometime last week, Thursday, which is, I guess, a normal circulation time. But Thursday or Friday, I can't remember. But the important thing is the important consequence of legislation that has to be reflected on. To be frank, I had hoped today that this Tourism Stimulus and Incentive Amendment Bill would either have been withdrawn or alternatively rescheduled to another date or subsequent reading. There is, of course, a deeper debate that I think that has to take place sometime in the future, and maybe this is not the occasion for it. It is our own philosophy as a country as to what incentives we continue to give the hotel sector in these islands. And I believe, Mr. Speaker, you are aware that these incentives have aroused considerable anxiety, not just in our own jurisdictions, but in the wider Caribbean, our own Eastern Caribbean jurisdictions, but in the wider region, because even as part of its restructuring process, the Jamaican government had to do away with some of its very specialized incentives to the hotel sector. But it's a very deeper question as to how far a little country like ours could continue to rely on these incentives to attract investment. But I'm not going to touch that today. What I want to focus on, basically, is Clause 3 and the new Clause 12A. First of all, Mr. Speaker, under the amendment to the value-added tax, and in one breath one can say that's not highly unusual, because I think in that same Tourism Stimulus and Incentive Act, which was enacted some months ago by the former administration, an attempt was also made to waive value-added tax. And unfortunately, I don't have that legislation before me, but the anxiety would be Clause 7B. It says, during the development period is eligible for remittance in part of the value-added tax payable on accommodation. And these are the words that cause anxiety. And goods and services procured by the owner or operator. Now the question is, what really goods and services are you referring to here? And again, I don't have the original act, but a multiplicity of things can be included under the rubric of goods and services. In other words, there's no precision, there's no clarity, and the term is at large. So that's the first thing. But the second thing is really clause A and A1 down to 4, which the member for Meaford South read. Now that is pregnant with conflict, pregnant with issues. And it is here that I thought perhaps that the opportunity would be taken to send the bill back to the drawing board and to reflect on this. Let us look at these two subsections. 12.1a, it says an owner or operator of a tourism project that has been declared to be an approved development may make an application for tax reliefs and exemptions other than the tax reliefs and exemptions specified under the Act, meaning under the Tourism Stimulus and Investment Act. In other words, it is saying that forget all the incentives under the Tourism and Incentives Act, but any other incentives Cabinet believes, or the minister, whoever believes is required by the developer, then you grant it. Now, what these other incentives are, no one knows. No one will know. And then to make it worse, if you go down to clause 12A4, where Cabinet has declared a tourism project to be an approved development under Section 11, Cabinet may grant tax reliefs and exemptions other than the tax reliefs and exemptions specified under this Act. It means, therefore, that you're going to grant exemptions, tax reliefs, for concessions apart from what you get in the Tourism Stimulus and Investment Act. If, of course, it is the wish of the government to grant concessions or incentives over and beyond what is in the Tourism Incentives Act, it is in their interest to specify what these incentives are. Now, I'll tell you the problem with this. First of all, and I accept that an Attorney General's department has to take instructions from its Cabinet. If the Cabinet says, I want this legislation, all the Attorney General's department can do is to warn and to caution. But what is the problem? First of all, it collides frontally with all the statutory regime that you have in place, because it is the statutory regime that you have in place that grants you the authority to give precise incentives. It means, therefore, that Cabinet is positioning itself to ignore the entire statutory regime that has been enacted and proceeding on its own to grant these incentives. So it collides. It collides. The second problem with this, there's a fundamental rule that governs discretionary power. It is that there must be no uncertainty. There must be no overbreadth. If there's uncertainty and overbreadth, you get into trouble on constitutional grounds. And I really do believe, and it's up to honorable members, what is the policy, what is the approach they want to articulate, what they want to do. But at the same time, it seems to me that this bill should at least be reconsidered, be sent back to the drawing board, be tidied up, avoid the confusion, avoid the conflicts, and give it the clarity that it deserves. I don't want to say any more about this, Mr. Speaker. I leave it there. I mean, I've had been told before, I mean, my advice is not needed. Fine, I accept that. I have no problems with that. But I also have a duty to warn and to caution on behalf of my constituents. Because this may well be used to do things in my constituency. And let it be understood that's what I'm doing. But this is not advisable. And I really do believe that it will serve the interests of honorable members if this legislation goes back to the drawing board and it is clarified at the soonest. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.